The horizon touched down on the pale green plains of Sida Star with a quiet thrum that reverberated through the colonists' bones. The hull groaned under the weight of its journey, a 3-year-long voyage that had left everyone aboard a little more worn, a little more desperate, than they cared to admit. Captain Lena Carter stood at the bridge, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair, eyes glued to the large display as the craft made its final descent. The planet below, like an emerald jewel in the night sky, beckoned with the promise of a fresh start. Earth was dying. The oceans were acidifying, the air thick with poison, and resources were spent like a credit card that had long exceeded its limit. There was no going back. Lena's chest tightened as she gave the order to land, her voice cutting through the tense silence. Touchdown in 5. All hands, prepare for deployment. A buzz of excitement rippled through the crew, tempered only by the uncertainty of what lay ahead. General Ramiro Diaz, a hulking figure with a square jaw that seemed perpetually set in determination, was already gathering his people near the cargo bay doors. Lena caught his eye as he passed, offering him a quick nod. He returned it with the stiff salute of a man who had seen too many battles and was ready for the next one. The descent was smooth. Too smooth, almost. The ground below seemed to stretch on forever, a vast expanse of rolling grass and towering, alien trees that reached upward like fingers trying to touch the sky. There were no signs of life. No bustling cities or towering skyscrapers, nothing that might suggest that this was the thriving home of a species. It was all too perfect, too serene. Lena took a deep breath and adjusted her uniform. The rest of the crew gathered around her as the final hiss of the landing thrusters died away. The doors to the craft opened with a soft hiss, and the sweet, crisp air of Sida Star rushed in fresh and unfamiliar. The smell of pine and damp earth lingered in the breeze. No pollution. No industrial fumes. Just nature, unspoiled. "Welcome to Sida Star," Lena said, her voice crackling through the speakers in the cargo bay. The colonists cheered. There were smiles, handshakes, and a few relieved sighs. The first step toward humanity's future had been taken, and yet, as Lena stepped onto the soil, a cold chill ran down her spine. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Perhaps it was the silence, the total absence of animal sounds, or the hum of insects. Even the trees, vast and green, stood still as if they were holding their breath. Lena shook it off. "All right, people," she said, her voice a bit more upbeat than she felt, "let's make history." The colonists moved forward, unloading equipment, setting up temporary shelters, and beginning to establish the perimeter. There was an uneasy energy among them, but it was the kind of excitement that always accompanies a fresh start, nervousness wrapped in hope. It wasn't until Lieutenant Evelyn Thomas called out from the edge of the clearing that the first real wave of unease swept over them. "Captain, you need to see this." Lena's heart skipped a beat as she made her way over. A small group had gathered near the dense jungle at the edge of the landing site. And there, standing among the towering trees, were figures tall, sleek, and utterly alien. They weren't human, not in the slightest. Their bodies shimmered with a translucent iridescence, their long limbs almost ethereal as they moved with an elegance that defied earthly biology. Lena's first thought was that they resembled something out of an ancient myth, an alien race as old as the stars themselves. For a moment, the colonists froze, unsure of how to react. The aliens did not approach, but neither did they retreat. They stood, watching the humans with something that could have been curiosity, or perhaps something more unsettling like the gaze of a predator, observing its prey from a distance. Lena's pulse quickened. "Get the comms up," she ordered, voice tight. "Tell them to stand by." There was a flurry of activity as her crew scrambled to establish communication, but the strange figures, whoever they were, did not seem to care for it. In fact, they didn't seem to be doing anything at all. Just standing there, unmoving, like statues. "Captain," Evelyn said, her voice cracking, "they don't seem to be speaking. Are we supposed to approach them?" Lena didn't answer immediately. Instead, she studied the aliens carefully. They were beautiful in a way that was unsettling, almost too perfect, too alien to be real. Their skin seemed to ripple like liquid light, changing color with every movement, and their eyes, if they had any, were hidden by a membrane that refracted the light around them. It wasn't until the tallest of the aliens stepped forward that the tension in the air grew thick enough to cut with a knife. The creature's eyes, dark, deep as the void, locked onto Lena's. And suddenly, she felt something. A sharp, visceral sense of wrongness, like something fundamental had shifted. The air felt heavier, and her throat constricted. She took a step back. The alien's voice, though not spoken aloud, slid into her mind, cool and calm, yet impossible to ignore. "You should not be here." The words echoed in Lena's mind, and she staggered back, her breath catching. The others around her reacted in kind, taking defensive positions, weapons raised, but the alien was not hostile. It tilted its head, its eyes narrowing slightly as if it could sense the rising panic. It extended one of its long, slender arms, and the air seemed to hum around it, as though some invisible force was at play. "This planet is not for you." Lena's heart hammered in her chest as the full weight of the words settled on her. The message was clear: this planet was already claimed. The comms officer, a nervous young man named Simon Park, scrambled to make contact with the colony ship, but nothing came through. The alien's presence seemed to block all signals, rendering the ship's comms useless. "Captain," General Diaz's voice came through on her private channel. "Do we engage?" Lena swallowed, her mind racing. Engage? Did they even have a choice? They had no idea who or what these beings were, but they didn't look like the kind of creatures you just ignored. And if they were capable of blocking the comms, they were likely far more advanced than anything humanity had ever encountered. But there was no time for hesitation. "We don't engage," Lena said, her voice surprisingly calm, despite the whirlwind of thoughts in her head. "We stand down." The Avitol, a name she would later learn, did not seem to move, but the tension in the air grew even more palpable, like the ground beneath them was waiting for a storm to break. And then, as if to confirm her worst fears, the ground trembled. The very earth beneath her boots vibrated in an ominous rhythm. "Everyone, fall back," Lena shouted. "Now!" But it was already too late. The Avitols, their forms shifting in the dim light of the jungle, moved forward with a speed and grace that left the humans scrambling. And though they did not attack, it was clear that they were not welcoming them either. The tremors beneath their feet grew stronger, as though the very bones of Sci-Fi were protesting the arrival of the humans. Lena felt it in her gut, a sense of urgency, a gnawing at the edges of her mind. The Avitols didn't seem to be moving aggressively, no weapons raised, no hostile gestures, but their presence was an unspoken threat, an impending storm. The way they stood there, so unnervingly still, seemed to say, "This world is not yours." Lena held her ground, even as the sense of dread rippled through her team. She had been through enough battles in her life to recognize that feeling, a primal instinct, the kind that told you when something had gone horribly wrong. And it wasn't just the earth shaking. It was the sudden coldness in the air, the sharpness in the way the wind cut across the clearing. The planet itself seemed to hold its breath. The tallest of the Avitols took another step forward, its movements fluid, graceful. Its head tilted ever so slightly, as if considering Lena. The voice that had echoed in her mind earlier now reverberated again, colder, more insistent. "Your presence here will destroy this world." Lena clenched her fists, trying to steady herself. She had come here with a purpose, to save humanity from the impending death of Earth. But what if Sci-Fi wasn't the answer? What if this planet, with its untouched beauty, had its own right to exist without human interference? Could humanity really impose itself upon this world, claiming it as their new home? "Captain," General Diaz's voice came through her earpiece, urgent but controlled. "We need to make a decision. The people are getting restless. If we don't show some force—" "No," Lena cut him off sharply, her voice quiet but firm. "We don't fight. Not yet." Diaz didn't argue. He understood the chain of command, but the pressure was mounting. His soldiers were already shifting uneasily, hands twitching toward their weapons. He might have been a man of action, but Lena knew he also trusted her judgment. At least, he did for now. The Avitol did not seem to notice the human tension. It simply stood there, watching them with its dark, fathomless eyes. For a moment, Lena wondered if it could see right through her. Could it sense her inner conflict? Was it aware of the questions swirling in her mind about their purpose on this planet? About whether they even had the right to be here? "You are a poison," the alien said, its voice like silk but laden with undeniable weight. "You are the consequence of your own choices. The infection of your world. We did not invite you." Lena's heart skipped a beat. The words felt like a slap, like a condemnation. The Avitols seemed to be accusing humanity of something far deeper than just colonization. They were speaking of human nature itself. Of the destruction that humanity had wrought upon Earth, of the selfish, short-sighted way they had always treated their environment. She opened her mouth to respond but found herself lost for words. What could she say? The truth was, the Avitols were right. Earth was dying because of humanity's greed and arrogance. They had ravaged their own world to the point of collapse, and now they stood on the brink of doing the same to another. Why should we allow you to ruin this world as well? The Avitol's words were heavy, resonating within her mind, like a hammer striking stone. We didn't know, Lena whispered, more to herself than anyone else. We didn't know there was anyone here. We thought we were the first. You are not first. The words hit her like a wave. What did that mean? Who were the Avitols? Were they the original inhabitants of Star, or were they something else? The ground quaked again, this time with more force, throwing several colonists off balance. Lena grabbed hold of a nearby tree to steady herself. Diaz barked an order for the soldiers to maintain formation, but his voice was laced with unease. They were all feeling it, the creeping terror that was mounting by the second. Then, without warning, the earth split open before them. The trees shuddered, and a massive fissure erupted in the clearing, sending plumes of dirt and rock flying into the air. The soldiers screamed and dove for cover, and Lena's stomach lurched as she tried to maintain control of the situation. But there was nothing they could do. The planet itself was fighting back. Out of the fissure, something emerged, a massive, dark shape that rose like an ancient monument from the depths of the earth. A giant, thrumming presence that filled the air with an electric charge. It was unlike anything Lena had ever seen before, an immense, organic structure, as if the land itself had been awakened by the presence of the humans. The very earth seemed to pulse with life, sending out waves of energy that made the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. "This is the heart of the planet," the Avitol's voice rang out, calm and omnipotent. "You have disturbed it." Lena's heart raced. What did that mean? This thing rising from the earth wasn't just a part of the ecosystem. It was something else. A force, perhaps. A living embodiment of Star itself. And humanity had just stumbled upon it, like an invasive species trampling through a sacred place. As the structure rose, the planet seemed to react, convulsing, shuddering, its surface buckling under an unseen pressure. Trees snapped, the sky darkened, and the wind howled through the clearing with a deafening roar. The colonists were in a panic, some scrambling to return to the ship, others just standing there, frozen in terror. "Get them back to the horizon," Lena ordered, but her voice was drowned out by the chaotic noise around them. She could barely hear herself over the deep, resonating thrum of the ground beneath her feet. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the massive structure began to recede back into the earth, leaving only the faintest echo of its presence. The fissure closed, the ground settling back into its previous calm. But the damage had been done. Lena stood motionless, staring at the spot where the heart of the planet had risen. Her mind raced. What had just happened? Was this the planet's way of telling them to leave? Or was there something more? Something that neither she nor her crew could comprehend. The Avitols, standing silent as ever, seemed unchanged by the spectacle. As if it were simply another step in their quiet, unyielding stance against humanity's presence on their world. "You are not welcome," the Avitol intoned one last time, its voice a quiet thunder that resonated deep inside Lena's chest. "Leave, or be gone forever." Lena looked back at her crew, their faces pale and fearful. She could see it now, the doubt creeping in. The realization that they might have made a catastrophic mistake. That Sida star wasn't just another Earth waiting to be colonized. It was something entirely different, something that might not survive humanity's touch. "Prepare to leave," she said, her voice quiet, her gaze lingering on the Avitols. She had no idea if they were capable of anything more than words, but she wasn't about to find out. "We'll figure out what's next." Diaz was already barking orders, rounding up the crew and preparing the ship for takeoff. But as Lena turned to follow, her mind kept racing. The question lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. If humanity was not meant to settle on Sida star, where else could they go? What future was left for them? Had they already doomed themselves to extinction, not just on Earth, but on every other world they touched? Under the oppressive weight of silence, the horizon lifted off from the surface of Sida star with a slow, reluctant hum. Lena stood at the bridge, staring out at the diminishing landscape below. The planet was as beautiful as ever, with its untouched forests, rolling hills, and deep, shimmering oceans. It was the ideal world, the world they'd hoped to build their future upon. But now it felt like a cruel, unyielding reminder of everything they had lost, and everything they stood to lose. The Avitols, those alien beings whose presence had pierced the illusion of hope, were still there, watching them, observing their every move, waiting for them to leave. And they had. The crew had packed up, scrambling back to the ship in an ordered panic, ready to take off at the first command. There had been no time to question the deeper implications of what had just happened, no time to wonder if the earth-shaking tremors were the planet's way of saying goodbye. No time to reflect on what it meant to be human, to be the invader in someone else's world. "Captain," Diaz's voice crackled over the comms. "We're airborne. But what the hell just happened down there? What do we do now?" Lena's fingers tightened around the armrest of her chair. Her mind felt like it was operating in multiple directions at once. They had come to Sida star seeking salvation, a place to escape the dying Earth. They'd been eager, hopeful, convinced that they could restart, that they could reclaim the future for humanity. But now, with the Avitol's warning echoing in her mind, and with the terrifying presence of the planet's living heart rising up to challenge them, Lena wasn't so sure anymore. "We don't have answers, General," she said softly, her voice steady despite the doubt in her chest. "But we can't stay there. Not yet." The words felt like a surrender, but there was no room for pride. Not when the very ground they had hoped to claim had rejected them so violently. The fissures, the strange, thrumming energy that had seemed to pulse from the planet's core, they were warning signs. Warnings that humanity might have ignored for far too long. "We have to figure out what the hell just happened," Diaz pressed, his voice impatient. "And we have to decide what our next step is." "The crew, they're not happy, Captain. They're scared." Lena exhaled, turning away from the viewport. Her fingers brushed over the control panel in front of her, her mind ticking through the options, none of them good. The horizon was still in the atmosphere, preparing for the long journey back to orbit, but there was nowhere left to go. The Earth had nothing left to offer, and they had just burned their bridges with Sida star. "What happens if we stay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happens if we don't?" Diaz countered, his tone hard. "We're out of time. We need to make a choice." Lena took a long breath. She had led this crew into the unknown with the hope that they could find a new home, a new chance to survive. But if there was anything that the last few hours had made clear, it was that they didn't have the luxury of time. If the Avitols were right, if this world was truly as delicate as they seemed to suggest, then humanity's presence could easily tip the balance, condemning both the planet and themselves. "We need to talk to them," she said, her words firmer now. "Not the soldiers. Not the scientists. The Avitols." Diaz was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was reluctant. "You think they'll listen?" Lena glanced out the viewport again, staring at the endless expanse of stars and the pale green orb below. The problem wasn't whether the Avitols would listen, it was whether they could even afford to listen. "They don't seem to want us here," Lena said, a bitter edge in her voice. "But they didn't attack. They didn't kill us. They didn't even threaten us with weapons. Whatever they are, whatever their intentions are, we're not completely at odds. Not yet." There was a shift in the air, an undercurrent of something that couldn't be ignored. The planet, the creatures, the force beneath their feet, it was all too much to process. But the one thing that was clear was that the Sci-Fi star they had arrived to claim wasn't just another Earth. It wasn't a blank canvas for humanity's greed. It was alive. And maybe, just maybe, it was sending them a message. The bridge fell silent as Lena's crew worked in quiet efficiency, following her orders without question. It was as if they had all accepted that whatever was happening now, whatever had just transpired, was beyond their control. But if they were going to survive, they needed to understand it. "I'll prepare a team," Lena said, already moving toward the command center. "We need to make contact. We'll approach with caution, and we'll listen. We need to understand them, not just the planet, but them, the people of Sci-Fi star." Her words felt heavy with the weight of responsibility, as though her entire life had been leading up to this moment. And for the first time in her career, she didn't have the answers. All she had were questions and a strange, persistent urge to find the truth. Hours later, Lena and a small delegation of experts, including Diaz, stood in the Horizon's landing bay, preparing for a return to the planet's surface. This time, they weren't arriving as invaders. This time, they were coming in search of understanding. Lena looked at the crew around her, scientists, engineers, soldiers, each of them caught in their own web of confusion and fear. But there was something else there, too. A flicker of hope. They were humans, after all. And hope had always been humanity's greatest strength. No matter how dark the sky became, they always believed there was a way forward. The landing sequence began, and this time, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just heading back to Sci-Fi star, she was heading into the heart of something greater, something beyond human comprehension. The Avitols had called them a poison, a threat to the balance of the planet. But what if the truth was even darker than that? The Horizon descended once again, its landing gears touching the soft, alien soil with a muted hiss. The clearing was quiet, too quiet. The air seemed charged, expectant, like the world itself was holding its breath. The Avitols stood waiting, just as they had before. Lena stepped out onto the surface, her boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. The other members of the team followed, their eyes scanning the alien landscape with wide-eyed wonder. Despite their fear, they had come to understand one thing: they could no longer afford to take without giving. They could no longer treat this planet as their salvation. They had to find another way. If Sci-Fi star would accept them, it had to be on its terms, not theirs. As they approached the group of Avitols, the same tall figure, the one that had first spoken to Lena, stepped forward, its iridescent skin gleaming in the dim light. For a moment, Lena thought it might speak into her mind again. But instead, it spoke aloud, its voice a harmonious sound that resonated deep within her chest. "You come to beg?" Lena took a deep breath. "Not beg," she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor of uncertainty in her chest. "We come to understand. To listen." The Avitol tilted its head, its eyes narrowing slightly. "Then listen. And you may yet find your place." Lena nodded, the weight of the moment settling on her. She could feel it in the air, the tension, the unspoken understanding between them. They were not enemies, but neither were they friends. This was a delicate balance, one that could tip in an instant. But for the first time since they had landed on Sci-Fi star, Lena had a sense of something more than just survival. It was a chance for both humanity and the planet to find harmony. To coexist, if such a thing was possible. As the Avitol took a step back, Lena knew they had just taken the first step toward a future that neither humanity nor Sci-Fi star could yet see. But it was a beginning. A fragile beginning. And that, at least, was something.